Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy. Happy New Year. Today's Monday, January 9th, and I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis. And our topic today is depth. So a few things as always before we start. I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll answer them as we go along. And also to leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon for Mirror of Intimacy. Let us know what you love about the book, how you've used the book. We really rely on comments from those of you that are using the book to help inform other people about it. So if you give it as a gift, maybe you give it for Christmas, maybe you give it to people when they're getting married, maybe you share it with your partner every morning. All of those little stories we love hearing about. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below so you never miss a post. You can also keep up with what we're doing by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. So what I love about New Year's is this recognition that it's not just a new year, but it's a new you. So happy New Year and happy new you. And think about today as we talk, how you're going to increase the depth in your life. And the quote for today is from Havelock Ellis, who was a famous sexologist from the 1800s. And he said, sex lies at the root of life. And we can never learn to reverence life until we know how to understand sex. And there's a lot of complexity and beauty in that statement. If sex is at the root of life, I often say that sex is at the core of our being. He says we can never learn to reverence life. What does it mean to reverence life, to revere life, to honor life, to be in awe of life? But we can't really reverence life or be reverential with life until we know how to understand sex. So he's saying you can't really be in awe of life itself until you understand sex and sexuality. And that's a very big call to exploration, a call to depth, if you will. Can you commit yourself to understanding yourself as a sexual being first and foremost? Because when you understand yourself as a sexual being, then will you start to understand the beauty of life, the depth of life, the meaning of life, and how interconnected this life is to the very planet we live on, how we are emerged from the same stuff the planet is made. So this becomes a macro and a micro examination of depth. When we think of depth, we can think of it as a descent to the ocean floor or soaring into the atmosphere, into limitless space. Those are the infinite depths that we recognize pretty concretely and easily. And some of us have a hard time even conceptualizing about our outer space or the deep sea world other than what we've seen. I mean, fortunately, we have much more opportunity to dive deep into the ocean than we do to dive deep into outer space or limitless space. But it's hard for us to imagine that, to imagine thinking that far when we haven't seen it. So when we think about the depth of our being, it's difficult to imagine that it's as deep as limitless space or as deep as the ocean floor. So we want to think about how to liberate ourselves from our emotional blocks, because that is the first order of depth exploration interpersonally. And there are many levels to this exploration of depth, but that is certainly the first one. And we all know when we bump up against those emotional blocks, we start to feel like I'm missing something, or I can't quite get something right, or I'm stuck in my relationship, or stuck in jobs, or stuck in a pattern I keep repeating over and over again. But these emotional blocks, when we start to liberate ourselves from them, empower us into a healthy expression. So we get outside of ourselves and we start to be able to express our potential into the world, if you will. So whenever there's trauma, there's going to be limitation or a lack of complexity in the system where we feel like our life is narrow or small, or we can't get ahead, or try as we might, we cannot figure things out. So there are all these blocks that are in our way of expressing our full potential. But when we start to free ourselves from those blocks, then we start to have the experience of ourselves as a human being in the world. We're more productive, we're more involved, we're less isolated, and we're not just ruminating about our small little self, our stuck self. So think about how free you felt when you've been able to move past an emotional block. And ask yourself, what changes did I experience in the world when I moved past that emotional block? Maybe it was the first time you were able to really experience grief because your grief was frozen and you were able to cry and appropriately grieve the person or pet that you lost. And that sort of opened your eyes, or it felt like somebody had cleaned the windshields of the lens that you were looking out into the world on. And, or maybe you were finally able to get a job or a new position you were longing for, but something fundamentally shifted for you when you got past that emotional block. And these things are so esoteric in a way. They're hard to conceptualize or name. Sometimes they're hard to share with other people because when they're happening to us, they feel monumental. But when they're not happening to us, or when we try to explain them, they don't seem quite as monumental as they were when we were in the direct experience of them. But I think you probably know what I'm talking about. So when we liberate ourselves from emotional blocks, that also allows us to plumb the internal depths of our reality. When you have an emotional breakthrough that you know happened, and you know yourself more fully, that becomes an invitation to want to go deeper into our psyches, to want to know ourselves more fully. Now, those of you that are on this call have that calling. You are interested in knowing yourself more fully, more deeply. If you didn't, you wouldn't be taking the time to tune into such a conversation. You wouldn't be in therapy or in a 12-step program or trying to find ways to, quote, better yourself. But really what you're seeking is your own potential. You recognize how vast and how powerful and how complex you are, but you can't fully sort of stretch out into the world. You feel confined, or you feel stuck, or you feel like you can't quite get it right. And that's the invitation. So it's not that there's something wrong with you, or you're broken, or you're damaged, or all of those negative thoughts that we tend to lay on top of ourselves or beat ourselves up with. It's not that. It's that you know that there's a better way or a different way. You know that there's more of yourself, let's put it that way. And that desire to know yourself more fully is a desire to dive deeply into the feelings. So I want you to consider right now that if you are in a process, whatever it is, your process of self-awareness, of awakening, and you bump up against this stuckness, this feeling like you're limited, like you can't get past the emotional blocks, the invitation here is to dive deeply into the block itself, to let yourself be the block, to feel how stuck you feel. Most people go in reverse. They try to eliminate the block. They try to get rid of it. They try to act like it's not there because they're afraid that if they acknowledge it, it'll just get worse. And ironically, it's the converse that's true. The more you dive into it, the more you let yourself become it, the more you let yourself feel the constraint of how small your world has become, the more you start to alchemize it into something different. So when you've had an emotional breakthrough, and you've known yourself more fully, what were the conditions of that? What was different then that might be happening now? So take a moment to think about that. And also feel free to type something in the chat box, or to type something in the Q&A box specifically if you have a question. So if you're at the point where you can't identify with your capacity for attaining such depth, I want you to be with that thought. because you might be listening to me thinking, what is she talking about? Or I can't identify with that, or I don't even know where to begin with that conversation or to get deeper. Or maybe I don't even want to know myself that well. That is too scary for me. I'd rather not know. And there's certainly plenty of people in the world that don't want to know themselves that well, and that they're perfectly happy to live their lives in the way that they do. But if you're a seeker, you're probably not satisfied with that. And consider that wounding messages that you're superficial or that you lack depth, or any kind of distorted associations of spiritual depth that line up with saying you're morose or you're depressed, can create an unwillingness to go deeper. So if you were told as a child that you weren't that deep, or that you're too superficial, or again, you consider that going deep means that you're depressive, then all of that's going to block you from your desire. And I would identify this desire as a longing, that you really want to think about it as a longing to go deeper, a longing for something that we can all identify with. I can't think of how many times in my life I felt that longing. I didn't know what it was. Sometimes it felt like it was for another person, or it was to have more money, or it was to be in a love relationship, or to travel. It was always about something external to me that I was longing for, until one day I recognized that this was a longing to go home, a longing to go home to my very sense of self, a longing to dive deeply internally to find out who I was, what I wanted, what I needed. And that's the invitation that I am proposing to you on this day, this first 9th day of January of a new year, to ask yourself, where are the places I want to go deeper in my life? Can I just sit still with that longing? Can I dive into the feeling that is gnawing at me, that wants to know myself better, that wants to break out, that wants to have success, but I feel so stuck or limited, or nobody really showed me the way? That is really the question, and that's the invitation to you. So Andy writes, you really helped me in the past to understand this concept of depth by encouraging me to carry my grief as I went through the holiday season. It's been so helpful to live more holistically and understand that grief is good, and that by accepting grief, I no longer am turning in destructive behaviors to avoid pain. Well, that's beautiful, and that's precisely what I'm talking about. So this is an example of somebody who was called by grief, right? And you can resist that, you can run from it, you can dig in your heels, you can dissociate, drink, act out sexually, spend too much money over the holidays, get angry with your family. These are all symptoms of a feeling state internally that you're avoiding. And when you do what Andy's talking about, is to become more holistic, to let yourself be with whatever is happening, then you stop perpetrating violence on yourself and therefore on the world. And you start to answer the call of the grief, which is to let it melt, to open your heart, to be free of it. But the only way to be free of it is to go with it. It's like jumping into a raging river and trying to swim against the current. If you do that, you're going to drown. If you go with the flow, as they say, and go with the current, inevitably you'll happen upon a log or the shore or something else where you will find some sort of peace, flow states, and also magically the quote answers that you're looking for appear. So a lot of times I think we are terrified that trauma is lurking in the depths of our depths. And we're really, really afraid that if we go too deep, that means we're going to uncover and solve every single mysterious secret about ourselves. And that is not the case. The way that the human organism works is that we can only tolerate so much, and there are mechanisms in place that don't let us go any further than we can tolerate going at any certain time and place. So if you're having this longing, this grief, this desire for something, the invitation is to dive deeply into it. And you will only be able to dive as deep as your capacity allows you. It's no different than if I said we were all going to go free diving and the bottom was 100 feet. Some of us would make it to 20, some would make it to 30, 50, 60. Somebody who's got great capacity could make it to 100 and back. That certainly wouldn't be me. But instead of beating ourselves up because we can't make it to 100, it's honoring ourselves that we actually took the plunge, that we were willing to go to 20, maybe 25, and feel what that felt like, and notice what it felt like on our chest, on our ears, on the body all the way around, and that we could actually tolerate that and come up to the surface to then process it, to metabolize it, to see maybe could I go another 5 feet. But you can only go as far as you can go. So don't worry about intense trauma lurking there, or that that's a magic bullet, conversely, for every single problem that you have either. So think about that. What stops you from diving in? What stops you from challenging yourself to look deeper, to go further, to try the thing that you are most afraid of, and to see what's there? At the heart of all of this, the depth of experience or knowledge just requires that we be patient, with ourselves. There's no magic therapeutic bullet. There's no one answer. And I think one of the problems we have today is that there's too much information. So people are impatient. They want quick answers. So they'll try this therapy or that therapy or this program or that. And they don't really take the time to really steep in one thing. And this is one of the diseases of our times now, sadly, is that for people to have a level of mastery in any endeavor takes years. I mean, there used to be a saying that it takes 10 years to get good at anything. And I believe that to be true. So there's no, I think I'll learn a language in 10 days or 10 quick lessons to speaking fluent Italian. It's not going to happen. And there are no short-term therapeutic fixes for these explorations. This is a lifelong endeavor. That doesn't mean you have to be in therapy for life, that's for sure. But it does mean you should pick a therapist and sit still for a good 3 to 5 years. So you really get to know that person and they really get to know you, and you really get to work out your issues with them and with each other. That's what creates change. It's not a quick experience, it's a deep experience. So I once recall seeing a matchbook cover that said life is short but wide, and it was one of those long kind of matchbook covers you've all seen. And that is really what we're talking about here. We're talking about depth and breadth, not quickness, not shortness, but a real commitment to yourself, to your process, to your depth of being, to have the patience to sit still with whatever it is you choose to do, whatever the modality is, and give it time to work, because it requires time. It's just like, people getting sober in 12-step programs. You don't do it that quickly. You might be able to stop for 30 days, which is spectacular, but the rubber starts to meet the road at 60 days, 6 months, a year, 3 years. It's over time that you start to experience the benefits of sobriety, whatever the ism is. So notice and ask yourself and challenge yourself to think about your patience. How patient am I really? How impatient am I? How much do I cut these processes short because I'm already on to the next thing? Or I notice that people are always asking me for book recommendations, as if the answer is going to be in a book. And there's a lot of beautiful, important information in books, but the answer is always inside. It's an inside job. So sitting still, diving into the feeling, asking yourself what you're afraid of, journaling about that, being in relationship with one person, a sponsor or a therapist that you can get deep with is really what you want and need in order to affect these kind of changes. So just being present in this moment, connecting with the words of what I'm saying, grasping their meaning signifies an incredible depth of comprehension. Just using your listening skills that were once, difficult for you to comprehend, maybe, or language, vocabulary. If you're reading this as an entry in Mirror of Intimacy, the ability to read and comprehend, all of those things took time to learn. You didn't just wake up one day and be able to comprehend vocabulary words or read or listen. We've had to cultivate these practices. And, for people that struggle with neurodiversity issues, whether it's ADHD or something else, focusing has been a proposition to cultivate, to go deep with, to learn from. So we all have our limitations. Every one of us struggles with something. And so when we put our attention on righting those struggles, in course correcting, if you will, there's nothing else to do but that, really. So be careful about comparing yourself to how others function or how others do it, or someone else is a quicker study, or somebody else comprehends things faster, or someone else got more than I got. All of that FOMO is disastrous, completely disastrous to your self-esteem, to where you are in your process, to who you are as a unique individual. So stay far away from that kind of comparison and keep it close to yourself, and give yourself credit for what you are doing and what you have done, and for the unique perspective that you bring to the world. And be gentle with yourself as you dive into the depths of your own being. So think about loving attention when you think about what I'm talking about. So many of us are violent internally with the messages that were perpetrated upon us, and then the ways that we talk to ourselves. David White, the famous poet, says, if we talk to ourselves the way we talk, if we talk to friends the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends. And so think about that. What is your internal dialogue like? Do you put loving attention on your flaws and your foibles? Do you learn to read your own cues and what you need? And do you pay attention to them? One of the things that I think is a great example of this, it has to do with hunger and eating. And all of us grow up with this idea that you have to eat 3 meals a day, and you have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And sometimes in families, you all have to eat all 3 of those meals together, or at least one of them, at least dinner together. Sometimes families sit down to breakfast together, and these are beautiful rituals. But it doesn't mean that everybody's hungry at the same time. And yet we force everyone to eat at the same time at all times. Where some people like lunch at 12, some people like it at 1, some people like it at 2, depending on what time they had breakfast or what time they got up. And so if you're not reading your own cues, if you're just surrendering to what the popular culture says or the pressure around you, which can be tricky if you work in an organization where you have to take a lunch break at a prescribed time. Sometimes you end up eating when you're not even hungry, which means you're not listening to your own cues in your own body. So think about that also, like, who am I and what do I actually need? Someone writes, describe the intersection of spirituality and depth. How can they inform each other? Well, I think if we are talking about a secular spirituality, a personal spirituality, one that I know for me and one that you know for you, those practices, those recognitions start to increase our depth of perception. And our perception is our reality. And what we put our attention on is what our reality looks like, because reality is both measured scientifically and it's also unbelievably subjective. So that is a difficult question to answer. Where do spirituality and depth converge? I think you could argue in some ways they're one and the same, and in other ways they're different, because they're going to be different for different people. But I think if you have a personal spirituality, that the spirituality is infinite. It's like space. If it is an infinite creator, if this is an impersonal, non-volitional proposition taking place, this universe, then it's infinite. And so we are infinite beings also. We can never fully know ourselves. We can never fully realize ourselves. We can never fully grasp a higher power or God or spirituality. We just long to know more of it. And that longing is depth, I think. And that is the depth of our perceptions or our potential. So both of them are calling us towards, you could say, the divine, if you want to use that language. But that is an interesting question, and I think one that could be debated philosophically for several hours. So I want you to think about reading your own body. You're reading your own bodily cues, and do you pay attention to them during the course of any day? And then also, what about reading your lover's body? And reading your own body, mind, soul, and your lover's body, mind, soul when you're in a sexual encounter. And when I talk about a sexual encounter, I'm talking about kissing, touching, stroking, eye gazing, not just penetrative sex. Certainly that also. Are you paying attention to your lover, or are you so single-mindedly focused on getting off? And then all of a sudden, it's just two bodies slamming up against each other. So take your time to be intentional on your lovemaking process, on your sexuality, because that too is infinite. And if we go back to Havelock Ellis's quotation, where he says you can only be reverent for the earth or for the world if you're reverent, if you understand your sexuality, then that is also recursive. It lines up with Stephen's question that the divine and spirituality are uniquely and inextricably bound, just like our bodies and our sexuality and our lover's body and their sexuality. So where's your attention? Connie says, can you share anything about a person with a vulva having expectations of having a climax orgasm, and yet with that agenda, they are finding it more and more frustrating that it's not happening? Okay, so that is an expectation, I suppose, about orgasm. And that, let's see, I have my own perspectives with this, but I'm finding it difficult to be able to have them get this. What would you share with this person? So I think you have to be careful about, and it depends on the nature of your relationship also, if your partner is open to feedback about what their difficulties are with orgasming, and what their agenda is about it, because it's like anything, it's a chicken and egg situation. If you are having performance anxiety and all your attention is on, I've got to make this happen, it's all pressure, I've got to make this happen, then that is going to have the thing itself be more elusive, whether this is a male or a female, or somebody who's even intersexed, whatever the gender combination is. The person is not focused on the process. They're focused on the result. And as long as they're focused on the end result, they're going to have a tremendous amount of difficulty getting where they want to get. So I think what I would do would be to share with this person, if they're open, what my perceptions are about what's in their way. And then I would start to guide them into the resistance in the body. Where do they notice the resistance? What are they up against? And then, of course, there are often underlying psychological issues that are also autonomic issues in the body that have the person shutting down, because orgasm is about being able to breathe into the body, about giving up control, about relaxation. And with that, you also have to have an enormous amount of trust with the person that you're engaging in the sexual act with. So if this person's only having sex with themselves, that's a different story. Then there are a whole host of issues there. And if they're in consort with another person, that's another layer of challenge for them. So depth, I would say, is your due. It's your divine nature. It's who you are. If we are indeed made of stardust, and we are here as part and parcel of the earth, we're not on the earth, we're not merely passengers here, we are made out of the same stuff as the earth, then depth is your due. It's the thread that binds life together. It's your through line. It's an all-inclusive perspective of your life. So we are the planet is us, and we are individual beings that are also deeply interconnected. So sexuality is not separate from this. You have an exceptionally profound vantage point here, and you have an opportunity to grow yourself as an adult sexually by diving deeply into these questions of who am I? Who am I sexually? What do I like sexually? What scares me sexually? How do I worship myself and my sexuality in these ways that we've been talking about, of compassion and deep kindness and care and being your own best lover, as I've said before. With that, you can know the universe and the planet more spectacularly, more intimately. So think about your past sexual feelings and experiences, and how they have brought you to this point of maturity in the present moment. They're all part of who you are, whether you've had traumatic sexual experiences, very few sexual experiences, no sexual experiences. All of that has you at this inflection point right here and today. And so this is who you are today. So no need to go into shame or beat yourself up or wish you would have, could have, should have. It is what it is right here and right now. And so you have the opportunity now to meet yourself and to meet another in sex, so that you are giving a gift of yourself and they're giving a gift of themselves that you can't get anywhere else. So see yourself as a gift from God or Goddess or the universe or whatever you believe in. And recognize that this is a very precious life that we have, and it is short but wide if you're willing to dive into it. And let these depths reveal your sexual potential. And these depths might be incredibly painful. They may have you re-experiencing trauma that you had, or thinking about traumatic things that you've never thought of before or hadn't thought about in a really long time. But you are discovering the resources of your mind. Think about it as a treasure map. That you are going on an exploration, that you're deeply curious about revealing yourself to yourself, and you don't know what you're going to find, and it's going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly, but you're going to meet all of those things, good, bad, ugly, terrifying, with grace, with an invitation to come in, to become more integrated is really what we're talking about with yourself, so that you can hit your full potential, so that you can ultimately share the gifts that you have with the world. So let's take a look at today's daily healthy sex acts. Do you affirm your depth? Do you say to yourself, I am a deep person. I am a person who cares about the world. And if not, what messages prevent you from doing so, from seeing yourself as big as the sky, as big as the rainstorm we're having in LA, or as big as the snow you might be having someplace else? Because depth is one area where voiced affirmations can have an incredibly powerful effect. So tell yourself, I affirm my depth. Let your partner know, I want us to experience a deeper fulfillment together. How are we going to do that? If we're going to make resolutions or set intentions for the new year, how can you have a conversation with your partner about how do we have deeper conversations with each other? How do we go deeper into this relationship we've had 15, 20, 30 years? How do we connect more fully? Because I want to know myself more completely, and I want to know you more completely, because face it, we're changing all the time. And we reduce our partners to somebody we think we already know. We don't even give them the dignity of their depth of process. And when you're paying close attention to your partner, yes, they have the same proclivities they had on the day you met them, and they process things the same way they always have. But if you listen closely, they are new iterations of it. They are not the same conversation. So take a risk and share your feelings, not with your words, but with direct sharing, with direct experience, eye contact, laughter, sharing an experience with somebody, not in a silent way either, where you're stewing and you're silently sharing your anger or your nervousness or frustration. Show the depth of your love, your upset, your hurt, without repressing your feelings. Do it appropriately, do it verbally, do it with touch, but do it nonetheless. Do not hide out in isolation or sulk. And involve your whole body in every action rather than isolating body parts. Make love with your entire being. Express yourself by throwing up your arms and saying, wow, I'm so happy, or today's such a great day. Like, use your body as a full expression of who you are, as opposed to being so tight and so constricted and restricted. So with that, I want to consider that this is a new year and that this is a new you, and that you have the capacity to share yourself, all of yourself, in unbelievably powerful ways with the people in your life that care about you and with new people that you're knowing all the time. So bring yourself into the present. Become aware of yourself as a person who's got this full vocabulary of feelings to express, of ideas to share in the world, and set your intention this year for putting your attention on what matters to you. And don't look around the world at what everybody else is doing. It's colossally uninteresting, and it's a time suck. It will drain you from living your one unique, beautiful life. So with that, I wish you a happy new year, a happy 2023, and I look forward to seeing you in February. All right, have a good day, and I'll see you then.